Well, hi, I'm Nan Simonsen. I'm going on just a touch early to be sure that I don't have the mishap that I had last time, and that was a camera that didn't work. I ended up shooting from my phone. Um, I'm glad you're here. I'll be starting in officially in just a minute. And you know what? I want to grab something. I'm going to walk away for a second. All right. There, I'm back. It is 10 o'clock. Let's do it. Hi, I'm Nan Simonsen. I am um, representing my, I'll call it brand, Aging Powerfully with Nan. What is that all about? Well, it has a lot to do with this, my book. I wrote it began reading it in July of 2020. It was published December 27th of 2020, less than 6 months later. And it's part memoir about my lifetime with an eating disorder, how I overcame it, but more importantly, it is mainly about aging powerfully, about understanding that when I turned 70, which I did in January of this year, 2021, I wasn't looking at the beginning of a decline the way 70-year-olds do, the way, quite frankly, the population looks at those of us that are at that age, that is officially old age. I was looking at the possibility of another 20 or 30 years. You see, I became entrenched when I was writing Aging Powerfully. I became entrenched with the people that I admire the most because of their evidence and their science, and that is the people who studied the blue zones, the people who looked at epidemiological studies around the United States, T. Colin Campbell having come up with his several books on the dangers of animal proteins, on and on. There's a group of people who have shown that not only is the science strong, but their lives have shown that. These people are in their 80s now and their 90s, some of them, and they are going strong like the people in the blue zones. So I embrace the people in the blue zones. I embrace their lifestyle. What are the blue zones? Those 5 areas that Dan Buettner and National Geographic recognized as 5 areas with communities who are the longest living people in the world. And the consensus is that those people are a group who survive primarily, not exclusively, but primarily on whole food, plant-based, and the pillars of lifestyle that I emphasize in my book. As a matter of fact, I turned powerfully that word into an acronym, a 10-point acronym on the things that we can do that can keep us alive, well, and keep us living healthy while we're alive. Some people begin their decline in their 40s and 50s, and it's just downhill from there, and it doesn't have to be. So, Aging Powerfully with Nan. This is my Facebook group, the Power Agers. We're on a mission to create a movement of people that will embrace simple lifestyle choices to prevent the chronic diseases we see all around us. And every Thursday at 10, I'll come on and we'll talk about things that matter. Last week, I actually went through my kitchen and pulled out the things that, because I cook a lot, and we do encourage you to cook as much as you can at home, because what they do in restaurants to our foods is kind of scary. Seldom are you getting anything organic, and the food is heavily salted, heavily sugared. Even things that aren't supposed to be sweet have a lot of sugar in them, and they use a lot of oils, and that's the subject of today. And the previous Facebook Live 2 weeks before that, so one was the 25th, on the 18th, I talked about protein. So we're looking at the macronutrients. I think the next time I'm going to talk about carbohydrates, because I one more time had somebody say to me, but Nan, I can't have that. That's full of carbs. And I wanted to pull my hair out because I live on carbs. And I'm able to maintain a weight that is I'm proud of, um, and a fitness that I'm proud of, almost living on carbs. But you'll hear more about that when I talk about it. They're whole food, plant-based carbs. That's the difference. Cutting out the processed foods make a huge difference. And we'll talk about why that is. So the subject of today's Facebook Live is fats and oils. What's the skinny on fat? And if you have any questions, if you have anything that you want to ask me, you can write it in the comments, and I'll keep an eye on that. Anyway, and I know that there are a number of people that will be catching up with this podcast at another time. All right, let's talk about fat. How much fat should I eat in a day? Well, I can't answer that unless I talk about the macronutrients and the percentages of calories eaten in a day that are, I'll use the word ascribed to those macronutrients. What are macronutrients? Macronutrients are, in general, some people say fiber is a macronutrient, but it's not. It's part of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, fats, and let me lower this just a little bit so you can see me ticking things off. Carbohydrates, fats, and protein. Those are our macronutrients. And man, it's all over the board. As a matter of fact, I was listening to a podcast this morning. Every day I exercise first thing in the morning, either on my bike, down along a river bottom, around a lake with all kinds of wildlife in it, geese and ducks and egrets and fun stuff, heron, whoosh, and or I'm walking up a mountain. It's not a huge mountain, but it's a nice trek. And that I do for an hour. Well, while I do that, I use that as learning time, and I always have a podcast on. So every week, I've got at least 7 hours of what I call class time, but quite often I'll listen to the podcast the second time, even while I'm driving, because I learn so much. And one of the things that they were talking about today was this new thing, I don't know how new it is, of people eating nothing but meat. In other words, carnivores, purely carnivore diet. And the speaker was asked, the scientist that was asked, was asked, and he said, what do you think of these people that are eating only meat? And he said, I feel really sorry for them. He said, because in exchange for what they're trying to get cut, if they're working out and they think protein is going to get them there, and they're trying to be energized from ketones, and their focus is on right now. He said, I'm sorry, because that has nothing to do with long-term health and longevity. And I agree with that, because I tried a ketogenic diet several years ago for over a year. And I thought that was a guarantee against things like diabetes, and was going to be a way to, it was very popular there for a while, a way to fix everything. And actually, my health markers were never as bad at the end of that year as they had been. And at that point, I was, 67 maybe. And they were a mess. I was pre-diabetic. The cholesterol was over 230. Now it's under 150. It's like 147, which is almost like gold. And anyway, that was the beginning of my knowing, because rheumatoid arthritis jumped in and another autoimmune jumped in, and it was a mess. And that's when I did my deep dive. I was not only studying nutrition for my coaching certification, but I was also reading these people that the science kept leading me to: T. Colin Campbell, Caldwell Esselstyn, Dean Ornish, McDougall, John McDougall, on and on. And what I came to and even the World Health Organizations, and the recommendations around cardiovascular disease, the healthiest regime for people is heavily plant-based. And I took it all the way, which was a whole food plant-based diet. I don't say I'm a vegan, because if I'm a vegan, then I'm not eating any honey, which I'm sure I've had honey. I'm not wearing any leather. I've thrown all that away, and I haven't thrown all that away. But I have a vegan diet. In other words, no animal product. And I've done that now going on 3 years, and I'm healthier than I've ever been, and I'm 70. Um, in a couple of months, I'll be 70 and a half, and there I am on my way to 71. So let's talk about fat. I have to talk about the micros, and the reason, or the macros rather, and the reason I even brought that up was because we look at percentages. So the carnivore people want 100% protein, which it's actually, you're never 100% protein, because all of that animal product has a massive fat in it. So maybe they're 30 or 40% protein and 60% fat. And so you're going to get all kinds of messages out there if you look into that question. But based on the people I'm paying attention to, and I'll mention them today as well, the what I follow, and what I'll say the people in the blue zones are pretty well doing. And again, those blue zones, oh, I didn't tell you who they were. Nicoya, Greece, the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, and 15 minutes from me, the Seventh-day Adventist community of Loma Linda, California. That's our only one here in California. And this tends to be the overview of the macros of those groups. Carbohydrates, 65 to 70% of total calories in a day. Fat, 10 to 15% of total calories in a day. It was T. Colin Campbell that proved that an excess of animal fat is terrible for your system, reduces longevity, and is responsible, and we'll talk about people who talk about this, for things as damaging as dementia and Alzheimer's. Very responsive to the amount of animal fat and the amount of animal protein. So protein, 10 to 15% of total calories, and fat, 15 to 20% of total calories. So what does that look like? If, for example, all right, so I weigh 114. I am either directed by the World Health Organization, by our National Dietetics Association. Well, actually not them, because I'm going to say something that doesn't sound right, and some people are going to criticize me for that. But there is a huge amount of lobbying and a lot of money going around that influences things like the National Dietetics Association, the Heart Association, because a lot of them are funded, even their conferences are funded by big ag, the meat industry, and the processed foods industry. And so I'm going to leave that alone. But the general guidelines that are science-based embrace these numbers: 65 to 70% carb, 10 to 15 protein, and 15 to 20 fat. So what I was leading to is that there's two ways you can look at that, or there's two ways that you can examine it. I was looking at Brenda Davis. Now, Brenda Davis has a master's in nutrition. For 26 years, she has been on whole food, plant-based regime. She's written many books on that. She's highly respected internationally. And when she talked about the how one figures how much fat is ideal in a day in general, she talked about what I've heard a lot, which is 0.8% or 0.8 grams of fat for per kilogram of body weight. Well, what's a kilogram? 2.2 pounds. So the way I would do that is that I would take my weight, divide it by 2.2, because then it's 0.8 per kilograms. And now I'm looking at what that comes out to in pounds. And then I do 0.8 of that, and it comes out in my case to, what is that, 42 grams of protein. Another way you can look at it, and this is what T. Colin Campbell, and I have a certification, a plant-based nutrition certification from his Foundation of Nutritional Studies in Cornell University. What he talks about is 10% protein. He said you could easily survive on 5, 7, or 8 would be fine, but he'll just average that out to 10% because that would take care of most people, most populations. And 10%, same thing. If I figure that I eat about 1,800 calories a day, which I believe I do, I've actually tested it and I can maintain my weight easily on that. And I look at 10% of calories would come out to 180 calories of 1,800, and then divide it by 4. There are 4 calories, no, sorry, divide it by 9 actually. Are we, oh, I see what I did wrong. Okay, I did that wrong. Because I divided it by 4, which is the calories in a gram of protein as opposed to fat. Protein and carbs are 4 calories per gram. Fat is 9 calories per gram. So if I divide it by that, I'm looking at less than 40 grams of protein a day. Either way I do it, I'm coming in at around the same thing, whether I take 10% of calories per day for fat grams, or I look at it at 0.8 per kilogram for fat grams. It's still coming out in the same way for me, which is under, for me, it's anywhere between 33 to 44 grams of fat a day. Now, how do I even relate that? Almost anything you buy in a package is going to have the fat grams noted in the back. It's amazing how quickly that adds up. That's the problem with processed foods. For example, you'll go to the store and find a package of, super healthy veg chips. And you'll think, oh, well, that should be healthy. Some of them won't even be fried. They'll be air dried or freeze dried. The thing is, really look at that package, look at the back of it, because what you'll find on the back will be a processed oil. Things like safflower oil, sunflower oil. What you don't want is palm and coconut oil. Those are 80% saturated fat. But even any of those oils, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, why I don't use oil when I cook, and the reason why. And a large number of the doctors, like Caldwell Esselstyn, can show you, and Dean Ornish can show you that they can reverse heart disease if patients will completely stay away from oil, which affects their cardiovascular system by affecting their the arterial walls, the endothelial cells in their arterial walls. Those of us that don't have problems with the cardiovascular system could add a little bit, like a little bit of olive oil, but I don't even bother for another reason, and that is because, for example, a pound of broccoli is maybe 100 calories. I'd love a pound of steamed broccoli well seasoned. A pound of oil is 4,000 calories. No thanks. I can have that food and have it taste just as well if it's well seasoned, or just as good if it's well seasoned, than if I put a tablespoon of, let's say, even olive oil on it, and I've just added 120 calories with no additional nutrition, and calories that I could very well have done without. They're sort of snuck into the processed foods. We don't even know they're there. But again, pick up something that's promoted as health giving, look at the back, and you'll see most of them have 4, 5, 6, 8 grams, 10 grams, 15 grams of fat in them. I'm going to give you an example of what that looks like, but these are the foods I eat. So if the question was, what is the best kind of fat to have? I'm going to tell you it's whole food fats. And where do they come from? They come from avocados, they come from olives, they come from some legumes. For example, soy, let's say tofu, has 6 grams on an average of fat per 3 ounces, but that's hardly anything. Um, Avocados, 29 grams in a half an avocado, or in one avocado. An ounce of nuts. That's what I eat. Every day I have an ounce of nuts. I'm getting 15 grams of fat from that, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that. So I have nuts, I have olives on my tomato and cucumber salads, Kalamata olives. I have tahini in my salad dressing. I have tahini in the hummus that I make. I don't add oil to it. In other words, whole food. And what is tahini? Tahini is simply ground up sesame seeds, and sesame seeds are loaded with omega 3 fatty acids. So that's another question. If I'm going to add fat, if I'm going to eat fat, what kind of fat do I want to eat? Whole food, but also the foods that will give us our essential fatty acids. We have to have certain fatty acids for our brain to work well, for our body to function. They're called essential fatty acids, and they are ALA, alpha linoleic acid, EPA, and DHA. And you've heard a lot about them. As a matter of fact, a lot of people eat fish oil so that they can get enough of their DHA, the EPA and DHA. ALA is a plant-based essential fat. That's we get when we eat plants. And what are the richest sources? They are flaxseed and they are chia seed. They're almost one-on-one, I mean, equal in terms of their omega-3 profiles. And then hemp seed, they all have omega-6s as well. So let me explain the difference. Omega-6 is an essential fatty acid. Omega-3 is an essential. The omega-6 is ubiquitous. You find it in plant foods. You also find it in processed oils. What's the problem with processed oil? Well, for one thing, it's highly processed. Olive oil, first press, virgin, organic olive oil isn't a terrible thing. As a matter of fact, there are some antioxidants in it, but there's not much to be said for it beyond that. At least it doesn't hurt you, and it does have some omega-3s, but all of the oils are much heavier in omega-6s. All processed foods have additional fats. They're heavy in omega-6s. You stop at a drive-through and pick up, oh, even if it's whole food plant-based, let's say a vegan burrito with no cheese, but with some beans and some rice. They've got oil all over that, full of omega-6s. A balance, a ratio of omega-3s to 6s should be ideally one-on-one, 1-to-1, because the omega-3s are preferential to the omega-6s, but the omega-6s tend to be assimilated more easily, and so they kind of bump out the omega-3s. 3s are best for your brain. But even if it's 3-to-1, 3 6s to 1 3, that's okay. You know what we've done as a society, because the amount of processed foods that we eat, the foods as I've just described that are packaged or prepared with lots and lots of the processed oils, they're so high, our diet is so out of sync that our ratio now is 20-to-1, 6s to omega-3s, 30-to-1. That leaves everybody with a deficit of omega-3s. So it's not just the population of those of us who are completely plant-based that have to worry about it. It's those who are eating foods that are so processed that they're getting an amazing amount of omega-6s to the detriment of the omega-3s. What do we do about it? What do I do to make sure I'm getting enough omega-3s? I eat flax and chia every day. In other words, on my oatmeal, in my smoothies, I have chia or flax seeds. I have sesame seeds, tahini as well in a lot of things. So if somebody said, well, Nan, you must be on a really low-fat diet. No, not at all. As a matter of fact, because of the tahini and the olives and the avocado, I don't eat an avocado a day. My husband does. He loves an avocado sandwich with some red onion and a little tomato and a pile of lettuce on it and a real nubby whole grain bread. He happens to like uh, Dave's 21 seed bread. Um, the and we're not fearful of the fats, but I certainly don't want the oils. That's the difference, and that's why if you ask what's the best fat, it's whole food, plant-based. That includes your omega-3s and 1 to 2 tablespoons of flax, ground flax. You have to grind flax, it goes through you otherwise, but chia is fine. Or chia, and I just keep a mixture in the refrigerator of those two with some. It's like a almost 1 to 1 of flax and chia, and then I throw in a little bit of hemp because hemp has a lot of protein. Hemp is much heavier on the sixes, but I still will add the hemp because it's a real good source of plant protein. What are the worst sources of fat? Trans fats, which are hydrogenated fats. When food began being manufactured with a lot of oil, it wasn't very stable. The oil would get rancid rather easily, so they hydrogenated it. They added some additional uh, hydrogen uh, atoms. Um, that's what hydrogenation is. And it stabilized it because it turned it into a solid fat, and that could sit on shelves for, well, like a Twinkie, for years. Worst thing you can do to your body. As a matter of fact, they've been outlawed, but they're still, in some forms, things are hydrogenated. They are processed in such a way that the fat is rendered almost impervious to age, which, what does it do to your body? Totally messes you up because you're not going to assimilate it the way you would if it was a natural fat. So the worst foods are trans fats, your hydrogenated oils, but also the saturated fats. And I know it became very popular because I was doing that with that keto phase to incorporate a lot of coconut oil. Coconut oil is 80 to 85% saturated fat. Does saturated fat matter? Heck yes, it does. There are articles that will say that cholesterol isn't bad for you. We make our own cholesterol and it's not damaging. Saturated fat is highly damaging, and it leads to elevated levels of cholesterol, which there is no question affects our cardiovascular system, creates plaque in our arteries, and is lethal. If we were, as we follow on an average, the standard American diet, so right on with the meats and the fats and the cholesterol and the, I'll call it status quo. Why are we getting sicker, heavier and sicker every single year? That's my mantra. Aging powerfully avoids that. We don't have to be sick in our 40s and 50s and on all kinds of medications, and then in our 60s and 70s falling apart and hurting all over, and then in our 80s suffering and being gone. The lifespan of the American lifespan is actually going down, it's not going up. In the last 3 years, it has gone down consecutively every year. That's ridiculous, people. We're such a rich country. All it takes is changing a few things like lifestyle. And again, I talk about all of that in Aging Powerfully. But also watching things like what we're talking about, the amount of protein. Don't overdo protein. It's actually not something that makes you live longer and better. It can actually reduce lifespan. 10%, 15% is fine, unless you're pregnant, unless you're lactating, unless you're exercising. But all of that you would be aware of. I don't mean exercising mildly. I mean like if somebody is doing competitive sports and weight training, they're gonna crank up some of their protein, but that's not most of us. And anyway, some changes like the amount of protein we eat a day, the amount of fat, but more important, the source of that fat is so important. And again, when I talk about carbohydrates, which I will on an upcoming Facebook Live, when I talk about carbohydrates, that's what I hope you're really listening to, because unfortunately most people are embracing protein as if it's an elixir, and it's not. It is highly damaging to certain elements in your body, creating IGF-1, TMAOs, trimethylamine oxides that will actually shorten life. It increases inflammation, and it shortens life, and it exaggerates all of the downward parameters of cardiovascular disease. So we'll leave that alone and just stay with oil right now. Okay, so the worst oils then are the animal fats, especially the saturated, and most animal fats. There's even saturated fat in salmon skin and salmon fat. So it's not, because it's fish, it doesn't mean it's not saturated. There is saturation in that, even though red meats and other meats, even chicken, have a lot of saturated fat, and more so than most of the even fatty fish. Um, so what are we talking about? Staying, reducing. I'm not telling you that everybody should be whole food plant based. I think it's a really good idea, but I'm not saying that's necessary. What I'm saying is crank up what you can. All right. If we were talking to Will Boschewitz, who wrote Fiber Fueled, and he is not only a board certified gastroenterologist, this just came out in May of 2020, but he has a master's in nutrition, uh, uh, nutritional science, and he, along with even this couple, the Sherzais, this is their newest book, The 30-Day Alzheimer's Solution. Their first book was The Alzheimer's Solution. They are a couple of neurologists. They, as well as so many whom I have began following 2-3 years ago when I went plant-based, they all had the same story. Physicians who were looking at health parameters of their own, maybe in medical school, maybe before, maybe afterwards, or getting frustrated with not being able to help people. And they said the same thing. They did deep dives into nutrition, and article after article pointed to whole food plant-based as the answer. And they left everything else behind in terms of what they were telling people. Christy Funk, another one, she is the breast surgeon of the stars. She primarily practices with women in breast surgeries, cancer surgeries. And she did the same thing. She went home one day and said to the kids, "We're going vegan," because she did so much study on what was so frustrating to her, which was that she kept seeing disease popping up all over, and realized it was this part of it was the fats, the wrong fats, it was the protein, the overeating of them, it was the sugar. Well, the sugar we'll just leave alone. That's carbohydrate, but that has nothing to do with whole food plant-based eating. And she just did a 360-degree turn, and it's all about what we eat and why it matters. And then finally, if I don't use additional oils on my food, let's say you are adding fruits and vegetables, grains and legumes, seeds and nuts to your diet, you're adding a lot more leafy greens, you're eating 6 to 9, or preferably 10 or more servings of fresh fruits and vegetables every day, you're adding 3 to 4 of grains, 3 to 4, and that would just be small half-cup servings of legumes. You start crowding out other things, and you start finding these foods to be absolutely fabulous. But if you're not using fat, additional oils, or butter, how do you cook? I cook everything without using additional oils. I roast my vegetables in the pan without additional oils or fats. And what I want to recommend that you do, because I have a lot of videos on my YouTube channel, it's YouTube Nan Simonsen. You can find all of that at nansimonsen.com, and it's Simonsen. It's Danish. It would be pronounced Simonsen or Simonsen, but we pronounce it Simonsen. And so Sen, Simonsen.com. You can get to my YouTube channel, and I have a lot of recipes, and you'll see how I dry saute to get any dish started without any oils, whatever, and the food is delicious, just delicious. And you will find a lot of, you have to watch because there's so much on the market that will look like a food that is and should be perfect for someone on a whole food plant-based diet, but that, as I said earlier, has way too much fat added to it unnecessarily, because we get hooked on that flavor of fat, oil, and sugar. That combination we can't turn our back to. I think I've said just about everything I want to say about this, and I don't see any questions. And if you have any questions, please let me know. But in the meantime, I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover. I do recommend you're considering fiber fueled, because this will help you answer questions about the value of carbohydrates in your diet. Plants are a carbohydrate. No animal protein has carbohydrates. He talks about not just fiber, but fiber for the microbiome. The microbiome is fed by the fiber we eat, which means by the carbohydrates we eat. And then the Alzheimer solution in their brand new book is all about how our brain is affected by these foods we eat. And you know what? I'm going to, just before I end, I'm going to read something that Dr. Bolshevitz wrote about oils, especially trans fats, but also just oils, processed oils, and what they do to our health. They create an unhealthy balance in our microbiome. They impair intestinal barrier function, which leads to the release of bacterial endotoxin that links to autoimmune, obesity, coronary arterial disease, cognitive decline, heart failure, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, non-alcoholic fatty liver, osteoarthritis, and low testosterone in men. Now that sounds like, and you're probably thinking, oh, he's just full of hot air. No, he's a scientist, board certified in lifestyle medicine and gastroenterology, and he's a relatively young man. And he is all about science, all about science. So much of what we hear, even from doctors who, because they never study nutrition in school, are lacking in all of this kind of research, and they don't have a lot of time to go chasing the science. So you'll get so many conflicting views. But I pay attention to the ones who have recently done a deep dive into nutrition and what they've come up with, and what I'm talking about now is absolutely their gold standard and the one that I tend to trust. Well, I think we're done. I want to thank you for being on. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. If you have any questions or comments, leave them and I'll get back to you when I'll get back to you. And I hope you have a great day. Consider getting Aging Powerfully. It's a good book about a subject that every one of us have a reason to grasp onto. Why not age with power? And have a great day, because I know I'm going to. Bye.